Good morning. My name is Diane. Today's date is October 18th, 2008. I will be doing a series of podcasts about old cars. Today's podcast is the first of 5 episodes about Robert Koss's old cars. This first is Robert's story of his 1951 bullet-nosed Studebaker. The format for the podcast is an interview of Robert by Diane. Diane will ask Robert key questions to keep the Studebaker story moving. We will talk about why he wants one, how he found it, the trip to get it, road breakdowns, the present situation. The background music is by Jeff Holes, is Akron, Colorado. It is downloaded from magnatune.com. Robert, when did you first become interested in old cars?
I have always been interested in old cars. When I was little, I used to go to the garages and the junkyards, and I enjoyed sitting in the old cars, and I also loved to take them apart. At that time, though, I was too young to be able to go back together.
But Studebakers, how did you come about the Studebaker? What got you interested in the Studebaker?
In 1950, I noticed a new car that really got my attention, a bullet-nosed Studebaker. It looked like a spaceship right out of Buck Rogers. I knew that someday I would own one. I would really own one. It was my passion to get one.
Well, I suppose at 8 years old, when you saw your dream car, that 1950, 8 years old, I guess that was a Buck Rogers spaceship. When did you decide that it was time to own one, or when did you actually think about it?
I was sitting in my office when I was working, and I had a picture of a bullet-nosed Studebaker hanging on my office wall. I looked at the picture and said to myself, "Self, you're a 50. If you're going to get a bullet-nosed Studebaker, you better do it now, or you better get going."
Was there any action that you took at that time to go ahead and try and find one?
I started looking at the old antique car newspapers. I got a subscription to Hemmings Magazine, which is a magazine for people who like to collect old junk cars, and I started going to shows, antique car shows, and I started looking at the cars.
And what did you find out when you started looking around? Were you encouraged or discouraged?
I had a lot of problems finding them, but after a year, I was looking at Hemmings, and I saw an ad for a bullet-nosed Studebaker in Lima, Ohio. The ad said, "It's so ugly, it's cute." It was only $3,500, and so I called the guy, and I asked him the details. He said it was roadworthy, and it was a solid driver, but the interior had to be restored. I asked him if I could drive it home to Vermont. He told me I could, but because it was an old car, he said I probably wouldn't do it.
So if you weren't going to drive it home, what was your next thought? How are you going to get this car from Ohio to Vermont?
Well, once I decided I was going to buy it, I told the guy I was going to take it. I got a certified check from my bank, and at that time I was driving a 1989 Astrovan. It had a trailer hitch, so I could hook up a U-Haul car dolly on the back of it. At 10 p.m., my son Brian and I headed off to Lima. We arrived at 8:30 in the morning the next day. We went to the dealership. The garage was full of old cars. A junkyard collector's heaven, and they were all in drivable condition. Out front was my dream car. It was so beautiful. I paid the dealer. We found out that to tow a car in Ohio, it had to be registered. So we spent 4 to 5 hours sitting in the DMV in Ohio, in Lima, waiting for our turn. I picked up the trailer at U-Haul and headed back to the dealership. We put the Studi on the tow dolly. It was late in the afternoon, so Brian and I decided we should spend the night in a motel since we hadn't really had any sleep for 24 hours. And it took about 16 to 18 hours to come back to Vermont.
So you stayed there, got a good night's sleep, and decided you're going to start off the next day or something like that?
Yeah, the next morning we got up, we were bright and bushy-tailed, and with the Studebaker in tow, we started back to Vermont. About 30 minutes into the trip, Brian asked me if I heard the clicking from the truck engine. He said that the oil gauge was fluctuating, and he didn't understand what was going on.
He was driving at the time?
Yeah, he was driving. We pulled over and I checked the oil and the engine was empty. That was really peculiar because before I left Vermont, I had the oil changed at Jiffy Lube, which...
So what was your diagnosis at this point? That now, here you were towing a car back and your truck wasn't working?
Well, we talked about, maybe we should unhook the Studebaker and use it to tow back the truck, but... I decided that wasn't something I wanted to do, so I put a quart of oil in the truck and I drove to the next interstate rest area and I filled it up with oil. But the interesting thing was that every time I stopped at an interstate for a fill-up, people would come to me and say, "What is it? Where did it come from? I've never seen it like that. What's a Studebaker? How can I get one? How much did you pay for it? How many miles are it?" And we got about 30 miles per quart of oil. My truck was really burning oil.
Did they think it looked like a spaceship like you had like in your old...
Oh, yeah, everybody thought it was a lot of people never heard of a Studebaker. They said, "What's a Studebaker?" You know, it was something that people in the 90s that were not acquainted with the 50s would ever know what a Studebaker was.
What did you decide to do once you got the car home? Were you going to put it up and use it only for display purposes, or what?
No, I drove it around. I like drivers, so I only fixed the things on it that I thought were necessary to fix. So I put a 1951 license plate on the front. I registered it as an antique, and I drive it around. It was fun.
Have you had any... interesting or embarrassing moments? You know, people think of old cars and old cars breaking down. Has the Studebaker ever done that on you?
Probably the most embarrassing time is that I used to work in Essex Junction, and I'd have to go through the Essex Junction 5 corners, which is, for those people who don't know where Essex Junction is, there's a 5-way intersection that come into where Route 15 and a couple other intersections come together. So I was pulling out of the intersection and into the center of the 5 corners, and it stopped. And it wouldn't start. It flooded. So people got out of their cars and stopped, and they helped me push it off to the side of the road. No one complained or made nasty remarks. They just said, "Wow, what is it? Where did it come from?" And while it was over the side of the road, I had to take the carburetor apart, and I fixed the float so that it wouldn't flood anymore. And I was surprised that since it was right in front of the police station, firehouse, that no police came to find out what I was doing.
So have you done anything since to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or is this something that can happen at any time?
No, I replaced the carburetor, and it's been running well ever since. And I really enjoy driving it.
Well, sounds like it's a fun car for you, Robert, and the stories I've heard, you have a couple more cars stashed away someplace, but this is the end of Robert's first podcast on the 1951 Studebaker. The next episode he expects to be the 1962 Dodge Dart, which will follow in a few months. Thanks for joining us today. Robert looks forward to your comments, and we'll talk to you soon.